Ho ho! Hey, I got my music. Anyways, just got it last night, so I'm still working, experimenting, and trying to download it. Welcome to ABAJAM Chronicles, the reading of books 1 and 2. And today is Sunday, as promised. I'm going to get this off to you. Oh, and by the way, that was the intro. The outro is just a little slower, but you'll hear it at the end of the reading. Anyways, it's a beautiful day today. Did some work on it yesterday. Today's Sunday. We went swimming. We went to church. Had a great pancake breakfast. They made it at the church, and young girl there is going on some sort of mission work there in Yellowknife among the indigenous communities of the Catholic diocese, and so she was raising money, and so we had a really good pancake breakfast, and now I'm all set to do this video. So, as you can see, an upbeat tune for an upbeat book. So, before we start reading from the book, let's read from the flyer. This is what I would pass out at my book signings all across North America, introducing people to my book. Anyways, Albert Meisner is really incensed. Not only is he being blamed for the catastrophe that has transported his whole property, you've seen some pictures of it on my Facebook page, his family, their friends, and 2 unexpected guests to this peculiar world. Worst of all the whiskeys he's been drinking is having no effect on him. Anyways, the truly culpable person, Frank, his future son-in-law, is in a coma, precipitated by his experimentation with the supposedly harmless objects Albert had salvaged a dozen years earlier from the wreckage of an alien spaceship. He also learned that moments before the cataclysm, the Secret Service, the police, and the army had been situated just outside his front gate, about to raid his home. Not willing to merely sit idly by and sulk, like I tend to do, Albert begins the task of chronicling the events, henceforth ABAJAM Chronicles, that may have led up to the dilemma, in the hope of making some sense of it all and possibly determining if there is any likelihood of getting back home. Right now, the real pressing questions were, where are they? And if this really was Earth, exactly when? As if things couldn't get worse. Tools being used to fortify the compound against the possible attack from their new neighbors go missing. So, anyways, first of all, the reviews. This was a neat story and a good read. Well done. Now that's pretty concise, I would say, from a Major General of the Canadian Armed Forces, Ivan Fenton. Thank you, Ivan. Great story. The many chatty asides and wealth of details gradually made me quite fond of the characters, as if I actually met and knew them. I found it extremely readable and look forward to sitting down with it every night. This is from Mark Gilks of Script to Word Services. And finally, my favorite, I read ABAJAM and was quite simply gobsmacked. Gotta love that word. It's very readable, funny, and surprisingly inventive. And in brackets he said, if I start a book and find it boring, I put it down. Life's too short. I didn't put Alfie's down. And this came from a friend of mine who was also an editor at Today's Trucking one time and an editor at Chatelaine magazine. He's a teacher of journalism at Centennial College. Don't know if he's doing it now. But anyways, Peter Carter, again, thank you very much. And of course, my book can be held Nook and Kindle and soft cover on all your major reputable bookstores, box bookstores, and even the small ones. So let's get to reading of my book. It's time to start reading ABAJAM Chronicles. So first of all, I just want to say, the intro here is, the distinction between past, present, and the future is only an illusion, however persistent. And that's a quote from Albert Einstein. Okay, put my bookmarker down there. And this is the first picture. I don't know if you can see it. That's right. It's got illustrations. Now it says, Albert and Jason returned from their reconnaissance without any encouraging news. And the people they're all together on the beachfront there. Chapter 1, in the beginning. I angrily back-kicked the solid oak door of my den, causing it to slam hard behind me with a resounding bang. I stomped to my liquor cabinet and removed the large bottle of Johnny Walker Old Scotch whiskey. I just had a major row with Jackie and Andrea that left me feeling exasperated. The nerve of them insinuating Sunday's disaster was wholly attributable to me. I did not appreciate Jackie's haughty attitude when she accused me of being irresponsible because I hadn't heeded her warning 12 years earlier, or her condescending tone when she declared my disregard back then had now culminated in all of this, our current dilemma. Andrea was obviously going to side with Jackie. She let me know in no uncertain terms that she would hate me for the rest of her life should Frank, her fiancé, die. There was no reasoning with her, no suggesting that he might have been somewhat responsible, perhaps even more culpable than I was in the events that precipitated this whole disaster. That really galled me. That she completely disregarded the fact it was she and Frank who had initially suggested the whole experimentation idea and then went about setting it up. How soon they forget. Unfortunately, he was now lying in a coma, so there was no one to come to my defense or share the blame. Such has been the story of my life. Only one thing left to be done about it. Marching behind my oversized desk, oh, here it is. I slumped into the cushiony comfort of the mismatched dark brown leather chair. Its high back and supple leather provided both comfort and support for me. I've never been subject to fashionable proprieties. Sorry about that. I always remind everyone that it's a working desk, not someone's showpiece. I leaned back, relaxed, and kicked my feet up onto the desk. Now, hope you don't mind. I've also never been accused of following proper decorum, so call me uncouth. It's my desk, my cave. Henceforth, my cave. All right, now, let's get comfortable again. I coldly stared at the bottle in my hand. Okay, now this is not a bottle of Johnny Walker. It's, Arizona iced tea. Got it in the States. That'll have to do. You don't want me to start slurring my words halfway through the chapter. It was one of those large 1.75-liter bottles you can buy at the duty-free for less than half the price you'd pay at the local liquor store. I picked up this jug at the duty-free store at Detroit's Ambassador Bridge just last week, or whenever. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't seem to recall declaring it either. Oops, my bad. As in everything else, I muttered. I was now starting to feel a little sorry for myself. When I'd brought this jug home, Bernie had incredulously asked me what I was going to do with such a large bottle. What a silly question. In hindsight, I should have bought two. Hell, a whole case for that matter, considering our present circumstances. I felt no qualms smuggling limited quantities of contraband back into Canada, as long as I felt it should be considered legal. Call it situation ethics, considering our situation. I always felt that as long as you kept your contraband purchases modest, and you were willing to forfeit them if discovered, not to mention being willing to accept the obligatory castigating from customs, really, it was no big deal. Now, going the opposite direction was a wholly different matter. I remember making the mistake of not disposing of 4 bottles of beer from a 6-pack when crossing into North Dakota and then naively declaring it. Oh, and this part here, guys, everybody, is actually true. This actually happened to me. I incorporated it into the book. What was I thinking? Or rather, not thinking. These were, after all, Americans. The fact I had been truthful must have set off some serious hysteria alarms. Truthfully, I hadn't expected to be dispatched into the U.S. on that trip. It had been unusually warm in Winnipeg, so I drank 2 beers during my hours of service reset, which ended up lasting the whole damn weekend. Wow, I drank 2 beers in a weekend, so call me a drunk. Anyway, those North Dakota border guards were all over me like ugly on a bulldog. You'd think they'd captured Al Capone, what with that grilling they subjected me to. I only began to worry when the lead officer strapped on the blue rubber gloves. The real crime of that whole fiasco, it still upsets me thinking about it, was that I was compelled, with an armed guard at my side, to personally dispose of the contents of each bottle down their special drain. Well, doesn't look like I'll ever have that problem again, I mocked derisively as I pondered the whole notion of borders, duty, customs, and the absurdity of it all, peculiarly at this moment. I scooped up the tumbler I had drunk from earlier and poured myself another shot, spilling some on my desk. Oops again. I was desperately hoping its spirits would finally take some effect and either lift or dull my spirit. I was really feeling dejected, mingled with a good dose of self-pity. So I figure I was entitled to this little self-indulgence. Now, speaking about self-indulgence, I'm going to pour myself some. All right. Yeah, kind of looks like whiskey. Just like they do on televisions. Anyways, so where was I? Earlier this morning, for unrelated but equally justifiable reasons, I had killed at least 3, or was it 4 2-ounces, sans water, or ice, but to no avail. Normally I'd be half cut by now. I've always been known as a cheap drunk. Yet here I was, about to embark on my next double. There was still more than 3/4 of the bottle left, far more than I would need to anesthetize myself several times over, under normal circumstances, but it seemed these were not normal circumstances. Funny thing, I still wasn't feeling any buzz, not even a mild one. For whatever reason, this whiskey had lost its potency. Perhaps it was all this anxious adrenaline raging through my system, probably suppressing the effects of the alcohol, I surmised. Surely it had to hit me sooner or later. My den, my inner sanctum, so to speak, was at this moment my only sanctuary and refuge from all the recent accusations and hysteria, much of it directed at me earlier on. All that madness was just beyond the safety of that closed door, my only thin line of defense. As I said, this was my cave. To my credit, I had decided not to lock it for concern the others might interpret it as a sign that I was abandoning them, or worse. I know Bernie would think that. She knows what's in this room. Well, okay, not everything. For my own peace of mind, and less of her nagging, I do keep some secrets from her. Let's just say the contents of this room could be lethal, especially to me. And you'll find out more about that later on in the book. I heaved a heavy sigh as I stared at the door. For all intents and purposes, if it were somehow possible, just by dashing through that door, everything would return to normal and everything that had happened would all have been just a bad Twilight Zone episode or dream. I'd race out of here like Ben Johnson avoiding a steroid drug test. Unfortunately, this wasn't turning out to be merely a bad dream. Rather, it had become all too real, a wide-awake nightmare reminiscent of those infamous 1988 Olympics. As a matter of fact, this was turning out to be far worse than any episode of The Twilight Zone that I could recall. So right now, all I could think of doing was to try to escape by getting drunk. Perhaps this was as bad a choice as steroids was for Johnson, but considering the circumstances, what the hell? Speaking about what the hell. Sure, they might argue that getting drunk is the same as abandoning them. Normally, I would agree with them. But nothing is normal here. Hopefully, by the time I get dragged one more time before my accusers, like Jackie and Andrea, and they start casting their aspersions, I won't be sober enough to give a damn. I raised my glass in a salute and sardonically proclaimed, to no one in particular, my only defense was ignorance, for I knew not what I did. I then took a hard swallow, emptying half the contents of the tumbler. I stared momentarily at the glass in my hand and mused, philosophically speaking. What was it? Half full or half empty? And at the moment, I found I didn't even have an answer for that question. Not that I gave a shit. Bernie cautiously popped her head through the door, as if expecting to see something. She probably overheard me and thought I was entertaining guests. But there was nothing to see. She had merely interrupted my deep and regrettably profound, all too sober musings. I could see the events of the last 3 days were taking their toll on her. The strain was clearly evident. Her blue-gray eyes behind those thick glasses, I always found them ugly, not her eyes, looked distressed and unusually tired. Her normally well-groomed mid-length auburn hair was less than neat and tidy today. Her slightly plump cheeks seemed drained of their usual rosiness. She nosed the bottle of whiskey, and the expression on her face changed to one of disapproval. She had a whole arsenal of expressions to choose from. As a wife, she knew exactly how to make me feel guilty, especially if I was engaged in something she found objectionable. Lately, it seems anything I did as a man was objectionable or inexcusable. I always figured being a man was excuse enough. Personally, I think it's intuitive. All wives and mothers seem to have that uncanny ability to make their husbands and or children, she says there's little to no difference, feel guilty without ever saying a word, even if we think we're innocent. A guilty verdict was always assumed by all parties. Getting drunk isn't going to excuse you from your responsibilities, and it sure as heck isn't going to give you any answers as to our predicament, she remarked scornfully. Answers, I quipped, are not what I'm looking for at this moment. I'm still trying to determine the questions like the hows, the when, and the where. Let's try that again. I'm still trying to determine the questions like the how, the when, and the where. Well, we sort of know where. And, of course, the real question is the whys. So, how is alcohol supposed to help with the whys, wise guy? Consider it a segue, I protested. A smooth liquid means to a most probably nauseous end. But, I raised my finger in a toasting gesture to her, I'm hoping somewhere in the process there will be fluidity of thoughts. Okay, I confess I was being a bit of a sarcastic smartass. I was hoping it might distract her from her original intent, that of making me feel bad. So I just had to continue with my little harangue. I didn't mean to trivialize our circumstances, but I was so perplexed by what had happened and just didn't know how to handle or cope with it. Remember me telling you how I got my driver's license when I was a teenager? How I had already failed once and dreaded failing again? How my mother gave me a hit of her Valium and I became so laid back, so relaxed, I emphasized, that I sailed right through the driving test. Well, we don't have any Valium on hand. Unless Jackie's got some. Anyway, this was the next best thing I justified holding up my glass. I could see she was incensed by the way she glared at me. She shook her head in a condescending gesture and sighed. That is a really bogus argument for trying to get drunk, you ask me. Just don't get too damn drunk in case another emergency arises, and we really do need you, she added rather coldly. I felt her remark run down my back like a cold shower. Oh, and by the way, I think you need to see to your dad. Allison just told me he's really upset today for some reason. He's always upset with something. Well, he's still disoriented and confused about what happened. More so today, for some reason. He, more than most of us, could use some serious reassuring, she emphasized. Allison says he's even too scared to come out of his apartment to join us for meals now. Yeah, well, if I had something to reassure him with, I countered, I'm just as confused as him, if not more so. Yeah, but he's blind. You're not, she sternly reminded me. You've seen all that's happened. Even if you can't explain it, try to encourage him by showing some of that confidence and whiskey bravado you seem so intent on relying upon. It would help the rest of us, too. The last remark of hers, albeit sarcastically truthful, definitely contained a good measure of trepidation and uneasiness. Okay, I impatiently adjured. I promise I'll see to him shortly. Her eyes glanced over, and her head gestured in the direction of my large gun safe. And while you're pondering our dilemma, don't do anything stupid that would only compound our predicament. Whether you like it or not, there are those of us who are depending on you. We're all in this together. Don't worry, I snapped. I'm not going anywhere. I understood the inference. It was a dark episode in my life I was forever trying to forget, and she made sure I didn't. No matter how hard I tried to redeem myself. Well, thank God wasn't a woman. You know, it's all well and good that I'm the one who's considered the supreme leader and chief survivalist here. Just remember, I didn't ask for that position or responsibility. My intentions all along were to simply prepare us for any emergency and contingency that I could possibly imagine. I was merely trying to protect you and the kids from, well, whatever. Those were my genuine intentions. God damn it, Bernie. How was I supposed to anticipate let alone prepare us for this catastrophe. You don't have to shout at me like that, she retorted, glowering at me. I don't like using profanity when arguing with my wife, but circumstances, such as they were, warranted my considerably rude and uncivil outburst. So I convinced myself. Regrettably, we men are good at that. Come on, Bernie, give me a break. This whole situation is totally off the charts. Furthermore, if having all the responsibility for everyone's well-being also means getting all the blame for causing this predicament, then I gladly abdicate. So it never occurred to you, she snapped back, that those things, the modules, as you and the boys like to call them, or some outside alien influence, possibly intended for something like this to happen. Us winning the lottery could very well have exacerbated our situation. I could see she had been doing a lot more thinking about her circumstances than I had given her credit for. Personally, I just can't imagine that kind of prescient planning without an omniscient God factoring into the equation. Yet I have to admit, those winning ticket numbers weren't merely a random selection on my part. Okay, I'll admit, considering our present circumstances, greed did get the better of my judgment. It's just that $16 million was too hard to walk away from. But in my defense, I sat straight up and gesturing like some slimy TV lawyer about to address a jury, raised my right index finger, placed my left hand on my chest, and exclaimed, "Might I remind you, I didn't hear any protests from you or the kids either when I flashed the winning ticket in your faces from that hospital bed." Bernie leaned forward, placing both hands on my desk, stared directly at me, looking all the more resigned and a little more tired. "No, you didn't," she conceded. "I'll confess, the money at the time was going to come in real handy, but..." Wait for it. Here comes her ready excuse. "None of us were subject to the same influences from the modules that you were experiencing at the time. Only you could have determined whether these things," she exclaimed disdainfully, "if they're, assuming they're sentient as you claim, intentions were malevolent or benevolent." I could see I was losing this debate, and miserably. So this is what Prime Minister Joe Clark must have felt like during the prime ministerial debate with Pierre Trudeau back in 1979, I thought. This conversation was becoming too rancorous. It was time to inject some levity. "Hey, it's not as if my body or mind was totally snatched," I declared rather flippantly. "And besides, us winning the lottery was a good thing, right? Let's not forget all the wonderful things the money's done for all of us. And what about all those fun times we had over in Europe? Hey, come on, babe." Bernie was not in the mood for any of my flippancy at the moment, nor was she inclined to be redirected down some nostalgic memory lane. "Al, not if that money eventually destroys you and your friends," she remarked ominously. "I seriously doubt anyone upstairs is reminiscing about those so-called good times right at this moment, especially your daughter." I decided I need to switch tactics. It was time to go on the offensive and open a new front. "While we're on the subject of questionable intentions, you might want to remind Jackie when you see her that if she's looking for a scapegoat to blame, she and Bill didn't seem too hesitant when we offered them that generous share of our winnings. They were all too happy to accept that $1,000,000. And supposedly she knew better." I shouted with more than a hint of contempt. "The knife cuts both ways, you know." "I told you, you don't have to yell at me, okay? Maybe that's why Jackie's directing her anger at you," Bernie suggested. "She probably feels complicit in all of this because she too thought she knew better." She briefly paused, then turned. "Maybe deep down we all knew better," shrugging her shoulders. "Oh, and that's supposed to make me feel better?" I remarked rather indignantly. "I'm just a lucky bastard who got to pick the short straw. I just hope all of you railing against me aren't a harbinger of what I can expect while we're stuck here in this, and I sincerely hope not, godforsaken place. I guess it all depends on how long you believe we might be, as you put it, stuck here. I can't speak for the others, but I think we're all hoping the same thing. I do know your drinking won't help us in that regard. Just don't let it get you so depressed that you might resort to doing something more drastic and stupid. Let's believe God hasn't forsaken us, she reminded me as she proceeded to close the door behind her. I hollered after her, "Tell everyone else I don't want to be disturbed other than for emergencies, or if Frank should come out of his coma." I shrunk back into my chair, feeling a lot guiltier and more burdened than I had previously. She really knew how to put a damper on a guy's drunk. That's what I get for marrying a teetotaling woman who's too damn smart for my own good. I moaned in resignation. I can't begrudge her for that, and I definitely don't envy her right now. Both she and Jackie seem to be the only ones holding things together. I continued to nurse my drink. Hoping to experience some enjoyment of its once silky smooth flavor. But not only was the whiskey much weaker, it was far less aromatic, sort of like drinking a weak, tepid herbal tea. Weak, tepid herbal tea. With barely a hint of spice in it. Yuck! I shuddered at the very notion. Actually, this isn't really bad at all. I actually quite like it. So, everything about this place was unnatural, topsy-turvy. Nothing made sense. First, there were the breathing and speech problems we all experienced. Everything we eat is bland, my father's biggest complaint since we've arrived here, even if we overspice his food to compensate. The whole area is one big undeveloped wilderness. No phone, TV, or any kind of radio signals. None of us know what to expect next. To say it was really, really disconcerting would be ridiculously understating our situation. And the one person who might have an explanation or some semblance of an answer might be dying upstairs. As long as he remained comatose, we too were all in a state of limbo. I could feel a deep, cold shudder of dread permeate my whole being. I refilled my tumbler once again. This stuff better take effect soon. Dad can wait a little longer, I reasoned. It was a selfish thought, but right now I didn't care. I was just overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness, of not knowing what to do. I had no one to turn to, not even Bill. In the past, whenever I got overly despondent or depressed, I'd just go to bed and try to sleep it off. Occasionally, in the course of my melancholic sleep, I'd see the absurdity of my condition, find motivation, get up, and begin anew. But even that form of escape has been denied me. Everyone here seems to be unable to get a regular night's sleep. I think all of us have been awake since Sunday. There's something uncanny about this world that's affecting every aspect of our metabolism, and it's utterly baffling Jackie. Bernie said she can't find any medical explanation for this phenomena or how to remedy it. As for me, I had resolved that under these circumstances, alcohol would have to substitute for sleep. Perhaps I'd find my motivation in an alcohol-induced fluidity of thoughts. Yet no thoughts were streaming forth, not even a small trickle. The only thing truly fluid at the moment was the whiskey, the river of blame I'm feeling, and the sea of doubt I'm drowning in. Oh, see how I did that play on words? Pretty good, eh? There was one consolation for me in all of this. Amidst all this uncertainty, I no longer had to deal with any of the subtle influences, persuasion, and on occasion, outright attempted manipulation from the modules. Whatever effects or relationship they had on me has all but been broken, regrettably, by the very catastrophe that put Frank into his coma. For me, there's the added benefit that I no longer have to suffer the accompanying headaches I got whenever I resisted their attempts at controlling my thoughts. My mind finally feels completely free from the symbiotic connection I had to endure from those modules for almost a dozen years now, all except for that brief period of reprieve when both modules were separated. 3 years when the Vanier's module was supposedly being tested by the U.S. government somewhere in New Mexico, or so the rumor went. At least I did save a lot of money on Tylenol and Advil during that interval. Rejoining them here last week was obviously a big mistake. The resumption of my headaches, albeit minor at the time, should have been a clear warning indicator to me. I immediately got that impression when they were rejoined here, along with a few other impressions as well. It was there, but not as not as oppressive as in the past. Damn it all! I should have simply had Jason dumped them separately into Lake Erie in Ontario, and none of this would have happened. Even if Frank was insistent on conducting some experiments with him and his supposedly scientist friends, I have only myself to blame for this disaster. I can't even blame the modules. Truth be told, their conjoining hadn't been established long enough for them to significantly attempt any real influencing of my thoughts. And yet here we are. I sighed forlornly into my folded hands and stared blankly at the door, which is beyond those shades there. Well, Frank, what madness, what disasters have we wrought upon ourselves and the others? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the reading of Chapter 1 of ABAJAM Chronicles, Two Families Lost in Time. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you here next Sunday for the reading of Chapter 2, ABAJAM Sanctuary, where you'll learn where ABAJAM comes from. Anyways, it's a beautiful Sunday out there, and I think you should get outside and enjoy the day. Have a good week, and remember, get a book, read a book. It's good for you. Bye.